do the scarf joint for the headstock of my guitar. So what is a scarf joint? Well, it's a traditional engineering joint for wood or metal to join two pieces of wood together to make a piece that's longer. So if you're going to join these two pieces of wood, say they go on that way, obviously there's a clue here with the pointy bits, but let's just consider these two ends, and you wanted to join these two pieces of wood end to end. You would not butt join them and glue them. That would be a very weak joint. There's not much surface area and it's end grain. You do not want to do that. So what we do is we do this. It's still to some extent an end grain joint, but now we've got a much bigger surface area and it is much stronger. And at this point you can start getting into arguments about whether the joint is stronger than the wood itself. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But scarf joints can get quite sophisticated. Now I'm still talking sort of wood engineering terms here. We'll get onto the guitar specifics in a minute. But come down here and I'll show you where scarf joints get really quite clever. This is centuries old joint used to join oak beams together. I've never tried this, but you can see this in videos on YouTube. And you have the ends of the wood shaped like this, and you bring them together, and then you drive a post peg, square peg, through the middle, and that is a joint which will hold those two pieces together firmly and doesn't require any glue. I guess you could glue it if you wanted to, but the point of this is it's an old traditional joinery joint, I guess used in oak beam houses, I guess, and it is strong and clever, and that is a scarf joint. But advanced engineering. Now we're not going to be doing that here. This is a guitar after all. We are going to be doing it this way. This is our headstock, this is our body. Sorry, this is our headstock, this is our neck. And we're going to be doing this style of scarf joint, very simple, glued together. But where it gets a little bit clever is the fact that we're going to be doing this. And this gives us our headstock angle. Now I'm reminded at this point of the Jeff Goldblum, I should have looked this up, is it Independence Day? They were so concerned about whether they could do something, they never stopped to consider whether they should do something. Is that the line? There are alternatives to scarf joints. I, at first sight, don't really have much choice with, given that my stock is fairly thin. I can't get the neck profile out of this. I've got to bend the wood, and a scarf joint is an obvious way of introducing that bend. But we don't have to do it that way. We could laminate an extra piece up here, because this is plenty long enough that we can cut it up. We're going to have to do this with the heel anyway. We're going to be laminating extra pieces here to create the heel. But we could do that with the headstock, and then we just cut an angle on it, and that would work reasonably well. If we had a thicker piece of stock, we could just cut the whole thing out of the piece of wood. If that was our stock side on, if we had a much deeper piece here, we can just cut the neck out of that. Well, I suppose I should be using my template really, shouldn't I? We could just cut the neck out of that. But that's quite wasteful. There's more of an argument for doing that with electric guitars, because the pieces tessellate easier. But if we just imagine these are our two pieces of two necks that we're getting out the same piece of wood. If we're trying to cut multiple necks out of the same piece of wood, we are getting a lot of wastage. This is less of an argument with electric guitars because we don't have this massive heel block. So without the heel block, things start to tessellate a little bit better, and we can get multiple necks out of a single piece of wood that only has to be about double what I've got here. But there are still arguments in favour of using a scarf joint. This is our solid neck, And if we have a look at what's happening with the grain direction is straight down the neck, and it's like this in the heel. And in the headstock, instead of being this way as it would be with a scarf joint, the grain direction is very slightly, maybe 15 degrees, maybe less for an electric guitar. Some electric guitars have, I think, 12 degree. I'm going for 15 degrees, by the way. We've got cross grain in the headstock, and that makes for a weak headstock, and we can see this in Gibson guitars. I'm going to single Gibson out here, but a lot of Gibson guitars don't have volutes. They did in the 70s, I think, but generally speaking, there is no volute on a Gibson guitar, and this area here is quite weak, and Gibson SGs in particular, my initials, have a reputation for breaking headstocks. I don't know whether that's fair in singling Gibson out. I'm sure other guitars have that weakness as well. But if we use a scarf joint, then if we can assume that this joint here is as strong or stronger than the wood, then we have a much stronger solution here, because we have straight grain in the headstock, and it's strong. We've still got something to consider if we're going to do a scarf joint, because I've seen a scarf joint done one of two ways. I've seen it done that way, for instance in the Campiano book, and I've seen it done that way. Why is there a difference between the two? Incidentally, if we do it that way, we have to make sure we've got much more material here, otherwise we've got a very short headstock. But the point being is, if we do it this way, the headstock starts here and the whole headstock is solid wood. If we do it this way, then the headstock starts here and the scarf joint is hidden inside the headstock. Now, I think there is an argument for doing it this way, because we don't have a join on the neck. The neck is that from there onwards, and the headstock's there, and this scarf joint is hidden within the headstock. If we do it this way, then the neck starts here and is scarf joint free, but we have a scarf joint slanting across the upper part of the neck, which we might decide is aesthetically unpleasing. But we have to look at the merits of these two, because actually it's not as simple as this, because in practice this will have been thicknessed and the headstock will be much slimmer than this, and the actual length of the scarf joint will be greatly reduced, perhaps even halved. And this is a potential weakness. There may be a veneer over the top of this, but the veneer isn't going to provide that much strength. So this is a much weaker joint than this, because this employs the full available width of the neck to do the scarf joint. There's another argument for this, and I should have thought a bit better about this before I started, but of course we're actually going to have the fretboard sitting on top of this. Imagine a slimmer version of that. That's the fretboard. So in this version of the joint, we've got the scarf joint supported on two sides for pretty much the full length of the scarf joint. So we've got the joint here, but we've also got this side of the neck joint underneath the fretboard. So another reason why this is much stronger. In this version, the fretboard is up here, and it's a thinner joint. So those two factors combined show that this is a much weaker joint. It's all very well me saying it's weaker, but that is only a problem if it's not strong enough. A joint only has to be strong enough. I can't say for definite that this joint isn't strong enough. It could well be sufficiently strong to withstand the abuses of everyday life, and it's probably still stronger than a solid neck, like that. However, I am going to go for that version of the joint because it is undoubtedly stronger. And why would you select a joint that is weaker just because there may be an aesthetic advantage in that you can hide the joint along the edge of the headstock? I don't buy that. That's the version for me. Please disagree in the comments. I should point out though that the main manufacturers do seem to be split between that and that. My Taylor guitar, which is one of the bottom end of the range Taylors, I don't know if it's different for the higher end, the Taylor is done like that, whereas my Faith guitar, which is a better quality guitar than my Taylor, is done like that. And also my Greg Bennett guitar, which is a brand I'm guessing a lot of you have never heard of, but I love the guitar. It's a Samick by Greg Bennett by Samick, I think it's called, but it's sort of a solid body acoustic guitar. My Greg Bennett is done like that, and to be honest, it's one of my favourite guitars. I may devote a video to that at some point in the future. So that's my choice for scarf joint. I've drawn what I'm about to do life size just to illustrate a couple of points. What we have here is, here's the neck with the fretboard here, the nut, the headstock veneer, we've got the volute here, and we're going to be cutting away material here and here, cutting here to thickness the headstock here for the neck carve. And I'm considering the headstock as starting at the nut position. So that my headstock is like this. And I just wanted to illustrate that the way we're doing it, we're going to be cutting a piece of material that is much longer, almost twice as long really, as the headstock. If the joint was done the other way round, so that this is the headstock here and this is the neck, with the headstock like that, then the scarf joint would be wholly within the headstock and we'd be cutting a much shorter section of wood. I just say this to make sure that we get this the right way round. Also, I want to illustrate another little point. I have got the nut here sitting on top of the veneer, because the veneer I'm going to put starting at the, I'm calling this the nut position, the zero position, with the nut behind there. And the nut is going to be sitting on the end of the veneer. The veneer is going to be plain flat, and then the nut's going to be sitting on that veneer. And I just wanted to make sure that that plain surface is wide enough to accommodate the nut, which it is. In fact, I could make the veneer half the thickness, and it would still sit quite happily on top of the veneer. I think I'm going to leave the veneer 3mm because of the fact it's cross grain. Something else that emerged as I was drawing this is my volute here, and what we've got here, this is the side view and this is the rear view. I've just very, very roughly sketched the rear view. You will see the scarf joint visibly on the back of the neck. It won't be that obvious because obviously these two bits are the same piece of wood, but the grain isn't going to match up exactly, and you will see the scarf joint. But what it illustrated to me was how close the scarf joint comes to the volute. And I wondered whether somehow we could cleverly incorporate the scarf joint into the volute and have these two lines coincidental. But I don't think we can, because the volute can't be too far forward, otherwise it will get in the way. So I think it'll be like this. The volute will be carved out entirely out of the headstock wood, but by drawing things out like this, you do get to see these things in advance. It might be, if the geometry was slightly different here, maybe if the headstock angle was less, you might find that some of the volute was made out of neck wood rather than headstock wood. By planning this out, we also see that when we thickness the headstock, we've got to be a little bit careful to take stuff away in stages and leave ourselves enough wood to carve the volute. Once we get to about this point, we can just flatten it right the way down to the, I think headstocks probably are measured at 1/2 an inch, but I guess in metric we're going for 13mm or 10mm here with without the veneer. But I think it's always worth drawing these things out to make sure you know exactly what you're doing, so you don't do any mistakes, and you can see ahead of time exactly what's going to be happening, even way ahead of carving the volute. Let's get marking. I'm being quite generous with the spare here. This blank is plenty long enough, so give ourselves a little bit of working space. And I'm just going to put a line across as a reference. This isn't a cut line. And I've set a bevel to our angle. And I have checked this is the proper angle. We have got the template right. Now I do have the option of using a white pencil, but I think I will be able to see that. I hope I will be able to see that. And just for extra, that's the cut we're going to make, and because I'm going to make it on the bandsaw, I won't bother marking it on the other side. I had a wee moment of panic then, because I couldn't see what I was doing. The cut was right at the very extent of the bandsaw's capabilities, and the guard was really high, and the top of the cut was in, well, I guess in shadow, and I really struggled to see the line. I think even if I'd used white pencil I would have still struggled. My eyesight isn't great. I was wearing my glasses to do it rather than my contact lenses, but even so I struggled. However, I have ended up with quite a good cut. Obviously I've now got to plane that flat, but it's not far off flat already. I've realised that there is an advantage, another advantage of doing the cut this way round rather than that way round. If we were doing it that way round, I would have the end of a much longer piece of stock to prepare. I'd either have to pre-plane it or perhaps just try to plane the very end and then it isn't actually straight. Whereas here, it's this surface that I've got to prepare, so I can just plane the whole of that flat, and then we've got a nice gluing surface, and I've just got to get that flat. I will probably flatten both sawn edges together. I'll probably clamp the two bits together and plane them in one go. I may use a sanding plate. I've seen people do that. I'm not a fan of doing it that way, but I might give it a go. Let's see how we get on. But we've certainly started off on a very good note with quite a good cut. Incidentally, this gluing surface, it is actually planed, but it's been planed with a mechanical electrical planing machine, and although it is flat nominally, you can see the little ripples in it, machining marks, and I don't consider that good enough for gluing, so there is a little bit of preparation to do on that, but maybe there's an argument for using a sanding plate and just taking a very small amount off, because it is nominally straight and true. There are just a few little machining marks in it. That didn't take long at all. It only took about 10 minutes. And I've got a perfect surface. Incidentally, you can see how I've been doing this. I finished, ooh, very dusty. I finished doing it that way in the knowledge that if you just do it that way, the paper does tend to lift a little bit at the edges, and I was finding that it wasn't, you could just see a very slight undulation, but having now finished off that way for a few minutes, that is as flat as the eye can see. You can't really see that from there, can you? But that is a pretty good gluing surface, albeit sanded. I'm sure some of you will say you needed to use an edge tool, you needed to plane that, but that is beautifully smooth. Don't forget, this was planed planed electrically to begin with. I was only removing the machine marks. Some of the machine marks have remained in that end, but I'm not worried about that. So we've got that side done. Now we've got to do the other side, and for that I will use a plane. I've got them clamped this way round. I'm going to plane the end here. I've got them clamped that way round because if I get any chip out, I'd rather it be on this edge on the long neck blank, because that's more likely to get carved away in the neck carve. Either way, a chip out isn't a disaster, and hopefully I won't get any, but this should minimise chip out. And I've not quite lined these up because I do want to take a little bit off. The angle is a little bit too severe. Do I mean severe? Yeah, I want to... No, the angle's not quite enough. Now I've somehow got to get this clamped up. Not going to be... Yeah, I need that bit lower. I've clamped a piece of ply there to give it just that little extra bit of stability, and hopefully that's what we need. Just checking it's all square, which it appears to be. Yeah. Can't be avoided really. This is in the way if I'm going to do a complete sweeping cut that way, but if I angle the plane, I'm okay. There might effectively be a bit of a twist. Whatever angle was on this is the opposite angle on that, so I've just got to be a bit careful. I've got to be planing some off here and off here, so just got to make sure I haven't got it twisted. Although of course only one of these surfaces is the gluing surface, which is the gluing surface. Yeah, this is the gluing surface. So this is the critical one, but this one's a nice to have because this will be on the top of the neck. Got to take more off this end. Just got to plane it up a little bit, but we're pretty square. quite how you check for skew. Don't know, but we're... To be honest, I think that's... Oh no, there is a slight rock. Yeah, so we're going that way. So we've just got to bring it back a little bit. Would appear to be there. I'm pretty pleased with that. The angle's good. Got the angle pretty much spot on. It's square. And when we do the joint, the two sides match pretty well. So now we've just got the glue up, which of course is complicated by the fact that this is a wedge, but we can do that. I was going to pin with a cocktail stick to stop the joint moving, but I don't think it's necessary. This is my clamping plan. I've got the neck clamped firmly to the bench, and everything is square, and my bench is true. I planed it when I got it. It might not be a very good bench, but I did make sure that I set it up well. So that's square, that's square. That will remain clamped to the bench. Couple of cauls and a plastic clamp, and then we have an end stop here, so I should be able to just push that straight in. It'll be in place and no need to pin it. I've crudely marked where the glue needs to go to. So I think we're ready to go. I think that's plenty. That's all true at the back. Now that did shift a little bit just then. More room for the ruler before. Has it slid? Nope. It's looking good. Messy. Hopefully I won't get the cauls glued to the work. That all looks pretty good. I will just check everything's still square, of course. That's square. That's square. We'll level at the top. And what little access I have at the back, everything looks good. Perfect. One perfectly executed scarf joint. That inside edge is amazing. I'm really pleased. I'm sure I'm probably going to go wrong at some point, but it wasn't today. So stay tuned and see what happens. So click like, subscribe, share, comment, and we'll see you in the next video.